to the world. We are live, Greg, to the world.
We are alive.
And let me check the last thing here. There we go. So, today we're going to start this conversation because I think for those who are watching and for those who may not know what's going on, last week we had an incredible, last Sunday, we had an incredible conversation about a testimony, the story of Greg Johnson as a former LDS. And a lot of people were having questions and doubts. And so one of the things that I really want to do is I'm worried, Greg, because I cannot see us. So, oh, there we go. I see them. I see us now. Okay.
Are we okay?
Yeah, we're
All
good.
right.
So something that I want to do is kind of like to have a conversation and to go deep a little bit into your story for people to know. I know so many things. When you were sharing on Sunday, I was like, is he going to say this? Is he going to share that? I was wondering the whole time. So
I went long as it was.
you went long, but you didn't told all the story that I wanted. I wanted you tell, but let's start with this. Let's recap a little bit. You grew up as a LDS boy,
Right.
is that correct?
Yeah.
How old you were?
My mom was a single mother living in Southern California in what is known as the San Fernando Valley. I was born in Burbank, and we were living in North Hollywood, California. And one day, some Mormon missionaries came to the door and knocked on her door, and she was home, and she was curious, but she'd been raised in Ohio, back east, and so she had a lot of opinions of the Mormons, as they were referred to, and didn't feel that they were a good group for some reason. So after she went through their lessons, she said, no, thank you. And then she found out that a friend of hers at work was a Latter-day Saint. And she said, I thought the Mormon church was a weird church or a bad church, but you're a really nice person. And so that was kind of a surprise. Well, about 6 months later, the missionaries, as they're apt to do, knocked on the door again, kind of following up, and just asked my mom back in the late 1960s whether or not, and early 70s, whether or not she would want to go through the lessons again. It's interesting. Back then, back in the early 70s, the lessons were much longer. Today, if you meet a Mormon missionary, you might have 6 lessons. One lesson a week for 13 weeks.
She was going somewhere, or it was at the house?
They would come to the house, once a week for 13 weeks, so over 3 months. And so anyways, they taught her. And at that point, she finally decided that she was going to say yes. And she joined the LDS Church and was officially baptized on Christmas Eve, 1970, with my older sister and my 2 older brothers. Because I was only 4 at the time, I could not be baptized because in the LDS faith, you're baptized at the age of 8, which is called the age of accountability.
Okay.
After the age of 8, your sins are something you have to deal with on your own.
After 8?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Until today?
Yeah. Up until 8, those sins are sins committed in your immaturity. And through baptism and membership in the LDS Church, you get a clean slate at age 8 when you're baptized. And this is so real, and every Latter-day Saint will know what I'm saying. This is so real that when you come up out of that water, you think to yourself, and you're taught, I am perfectly clean. There's not a sin in my life. I am completely perfect. I'm pure. But it doesn't take long. And I remember in my case that my brothers let me sit in the front chair of the car, the front seat of the car, on the day that I got baptized, which would have been 4 years later in 1974.
Wow.
And I got to sit in the front seat as the little brother. That was a big deal. And my mom said we were going to go to a donut store and get donuts. And so I was feeling really great. But my brother Steve was right behind me, kind of poking me. You know, we didn't wear our seatbelts back then. He was poking me, and I yelled at him and said, "Stop poking at me." And he was doing it on purpose because he said, "Aha, you just lost your temper. You have your first sin. And he was right. In my mind, I went, oh, I didn't even last like
So
30
funny.
minutes, you know. So my mom joined. I joined. 2 years later, a year and a half later, my mom married a Mormon man, my stepfather, who would eventually take us to Colorado, where we would live in Fort Collins for 4 years and Littleton, Colorado for 2 years. So 4 and 2, 6 total. And as a result of living there, that was kind of the ideal or prime time of our lives. My sister met and married an LDS man.
Oh, wow.
He was a student at BYU, so they went and lived in Provo. My older brothers were going to church actively, going to seminary classes in their high school years, and I was just a young elementary age kid, eventually at the age of 12 becoming a member of the Aaronic priesthood and a deacon, and everything was going pretty good. And I used to sing the old mission song, "I hope they call me on a mission," you know.
You mentioned that on Sunday.
Yeah, I looked forward to that I was 12 years old, and in 6 years I would get to go, or 7 years at the time, I would get to go on a mission. And so I was very zealous. I was very sincere. I loved being a Latter-day Saint. I felt that I was a cut above everyone else at my school in Fort Collins, Colorado, and Bowder Elementary. Every kid knew that I was a Latter-day Saint, and I was inviting them to primary. I was inviting them to church. I was inviting them to youth activities, and I was very proud to be a Latter-day Saint. I thought I was a member of the one true church upon the face of the earth.
You know what is funny? That it seems like you, from very young age, you were very evangelistic.
Right. I don't think I lost that gift. You know, that impartation, that gift that I knew as a child was a gift that I think came from the Lord. And now that I'm, a born again traditional Christian, those gifts came with me, if you will. And again, when I became a priesthood holder and they laid their hands on me and confirmed me a member of the Aaronic priesthood, I took that very seriously. I was now a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was now a member of the Aaronic priesthood. I had authority that was given to me by Heavenly Father, and that was really important to me. And so at one point, about middle of my 7th grade year, we had to move from Fort Collins down to Littleton. And my mom was beginning to have some serious marital problems with my stepdad. He was not a devout Latter-day Saint. He kind of misled her to think that he was before they got married. And then once they got married, he kind of pulled back the curtain. And she realized he wasn't pursuing a lifestyle that would allow them to be married in the temple, because they were both divorced. They could only be married civilly by a bishop. But she wanted within 1 year to be married in the temple, and he wasn't doing anything to get ready to be married in the temple. He had formerly been married in the temple, so he was wearing his garments. My mom couldn't wear her temple garments, which was kind of a significant thing for her. She really wanted to be a part of the full-fledged temple marriage, temple Mormon, have your family sealed together for eternity. But that was kind of falling apart. Consequently, when we moved to Littleton, my mom started to stop going to the Mormon church. She was angry and depressed. I would go. Unfortunately, it was very hard for me because I was going to church with my stepdad, who always kind of had a connection to the local church, even if he wasn't actively being obedient to it. So he always wanted to be connected. So I was going to church with him when I knew in my heart that he was a bad dude, that he swore badly at my mom. He said very mean things about my mom. I was a witness to that. I heard those things. And here I am going to church with him and knowing that he's not a very good person. But I had a couple experiences there in Littleton, and eventually a Christian friend, 2 friends, invited me to a camp that they went to every year. It was called the it was just a Bible camp that they went through with their local Christian church. And they asked me if I wanted to go, not because they were trying to get me to be a evangelical Christian. They didn't even care.
Kind of like having fun together,
Yeah,
friends.
Yeah, hey, we're going to camp. You want to go to camp? So I thought, yeah, I'd gone to a lot of Boy Scout camps as a Latter-day Saint. I knew what that was. That was a lot of fun. So I asked my mom. She said yes. And here I'm, going to Colorado Springs at a small little camp called Elam Bible Camp. And I went there in the summer of 1980 in August. And
How old you are at that point?
I'm just about to turn 14.
Okay.
So, yeah, I would turn 14 in September, and it was August. So I went down there, and, they'd have this chapel in the morning and chapel in the night and pray before every meal and have all these activities, quiet time in your cabin. And there were some experiences there at the camp that really kind of bothered me. Number one day, the speaker talked about the prodigal son from Luke chapter 15, about this lost son. And I couldn't understand what this word prodigal meant. He kept saying it. And I leaned over to my little Baptist friend, Eric, and I said, hey, Eric, what's a prodigal? And he goes, that story in the Bible. And I go, what story? He goes, oh, the story about that kid who takes his dad's money and he goes out and gets drunk and does a lot of bad things. And then he comes home. And I had not a clue what he was talking about.
So you didn't recognize the story?
Not even the story of the prodigal son.
Okay.
Because in a Latter-day Saint church, you're not studying the content of the New Testament. Now, today, the LDS Church has a scriptural study program where you study the Old Testament for 1 year, the New Testament for 1 year, the Book of Mormon for 1 year, and then the rest of the scriptures and the prophets for the other year. So you study the Book of Mormon once every 4 years. You study the New Testament once every 4 years.
Okay.
In my childhood, that was not the case. So being familiar with Bible stories like the typical Christian kid would was not normal to me. I had to learn all about the Book of Mormon history and Nephi and all those stories. So I didn't have this knowledge. And what I did that day was absolutely shocking to me. I leaned over to Eric and I go, oh, yeah, I remember that story.
You lied.
I lied about what I knew about the Bible because in my mind, I was a member of the LDS Church. I was greater than Eric. I had the right church. He did not. How could he know something more about the Bible than I did? That would mean that I was inferior, and I had to prove to myself that I was not inferior.
Oh, wow.
So I told him, right? I remember lying through my teeth. Right as I remember that story. And I'm thinking, I don't even know the story. Why would I not know this story if my friend Eric, who's a lowly traditional Christian, why does he know it and I don't know it?
A low category.
Yes, he's like a lesser version, but I'm like the higher version. And it bothered me that he knew things about the Bible that I didn't. And I had my King James Bible, that was printed by the LDS Church, and I didn't let them taint me. I had the Mormon priesthood with me. I got that at age 12. So I thought, I can be among these traditional Christians and be just fine. So that was really one big thing. Then there's this other story that I think is worth telling. There's a young African-American guy in my cabin, my age. What a delightful guy. I'd love to meet him again someday. But his name was classic, Theodos DeForest. And I really enjoyed Theodos. And that was his name. It was a great name.
Theophis, if you're watching.
Yes, if you're watching, get a hold of me. But Theodos was a black kid, and I asked him rather casually, hey, Theodos, are you black because you were neutral in heaven?
Oh, my gosh, Greg. Those questions cannot run today.
Came right out of my mouth. And it was 1980. And he said, excuse me? And I said, were you like neutral in heaven, and therefore you live on this planet as a black person? And he said, I've never heard that. Why would you say that? It's terrible. And I kind of felt nervous, like, maybe
I made a mistake.
Maybe that's not, I knew that's what I'd been taught. But maybe it wasn't right to say that to a black person. And he said that, I said, well, there's this idea that there's a pre-existent world, and some of us follow Jesus, and some of us follow Lucifer, and some of us were kind of in the middle, and the ones that were in the middle had to come to earth being born as black people.
You did. Have you watched that video where what will happen if an LDS missionary go to your door and throw you the truth right away? It's kind of like they said, well, the Father in heaven has a wife, and
I've not seen that.
So, but anyhow, you're doing exactly the same
Well,
thing,
I'm shocking
throwing
him.
everything to him.
I'm shocking him, and his comment was, "That's crazy. That's crazy." And I did the same thing I did with Eric. I went, I think I don't believe that myself. I think that's just something my church has taught me. Like I lied about that too, because I realized in the middle of that what I was saying was offensive.
Oh man.
And that he thought was crazy. And so I'm like, wow, I didn't know what a prodigal son was, but I lied about that. I didn't know that blacks were not being cursed for some pre-existent decision they made, and I lied about that. And then there was this song that I won't repeat now in length
That you
because I
share
did
on Sunday.
both services. Who killed Jesus? And I thought that this question was so strange that I would not kill Jesus. I mean, I love Jesus. And the song says, was it the Roman soldiers? Was it Pontius Pilate? Was it the Jewish people? In all of the different choruses. And then that finishes by, I no longer wonder anymore. I found what I've been searching for. My sin demanded hell, on him the judgment fell. So now it's plain to see I was guilty. It was really me. And then the idea was, I killed Jesus? What a dumb song. I did not kill Jesus. But by the end of that camp, I realized they're not saying that I physically killed Jesus. This song is saying that my sin,
Because of your sin.
because of my sin, Jesus died to pay for my sins. So my sins put Jesus on the cross, i.e., Jesus put himself on the cross. He allowed himself to die on the cross for my sins. And they took it to the length of saying, if you were the only one that had ever sinned, Jesus would have still come and he still would have died for you and paid for your sins. And I would later learn in the New Testament how Jesus says, no man takes my life, but I gladly lay it down. And how in that same occasion, Jesus says, I could call a legion of angels. That's 6,000. I believe that a legion is 6,000. If I'm mistaken, you can look that up. But 6,000 angels could show up at the base of the cross and get Jesus off the cross, clean him up, sustain him, take the crown of thorns off, take the nails out of his hands inside, and just vaporize every Roman soldier for miles around. But they didn't do that because Jesus said, I came to do the will of my Father, and I willingly lay my life down. So now I have this new idea that it's not about being good. It's not about doing my best. It's not about a ring that I used to wear on my finger that said CTR, choose the right. It wasn't about me at all. It was about what Jesus did for me and a free gift that I needed to receive from him, which was the gift of salvation.
So did you get to that realization right at the end of the camp? Kind of?
It's kind of clear to me that that's what they're teaching is that it's not something I can earn, it's a gift. And I walk away very confused. I remember they had like a fire pit at the end of the week on Friday night where everybody could say something like a testimony.
Yeah.
And I told my testimony and I said that I had been raised in a different church and that I learned a lot of things this week about God that were different than what I used to believe. And I'm going to go home and I'm going to think about these things and I'm going to pray about it. So I went to my Mormon bishop in Littleton, Colorado, and I set up an appointment. And this was a good man, but he was a lay level leader. He wasn't trained. He was not a theologian. He was a business owner, And when I presented to him that, we think that there's 3 heavens and no hell. This camp that I went to talked about a heaven and a hell, that there really is a hell and there is a heaven, but there's only one heaven. Why do we think we're right and why do we think they're wrong? And he didn't really have a good answer. Then I would say, they said that we can never do enough to earn God's grace, that we have to trust him and act in faith. And why do we say that we have to obey the laws and ordinances of the gospel? And then again, he gave his best human effort,
Wow.
And I remember driving home on my bicycle late at night, and I think I may have met with him a second time, if my memory is correct. But both times I felt, nice man, but he doesn't even know what he himself believes. He didn't have adequate answers. So that in February 22nd, 1981, I went to what was called then, which is rarely done today, but here I was, 14 and a half years old, and I went to a court called a bishop's court. And there my bishop and his first counselor and his second counselor sat on one side of the desk.
You with those 3 men?
Those 3 men, and I was a 14-year-old boy on the other side of the desk, and my mom came in with me for a few hours because she also decided to leave the church leave the LDS church at that time. And I was basically telling them that night that I wanted to have my name removed. It was interesting because even as a male of 14 and my mother being an adult, they did not want to honor her request as a mother to take me out of the LDS church. They needed me to request that for myself.
Okay.
So when I did, they were trying to kind of say to me that your mother has influenced you wrongly.
Okay.
And then they asked her to leave. So it was just me and these three men. And they were pleading with me not to make this decision. You're going to lose your priesthood. You know what that means, Greg? You won't have the power to act in God's name here on this earth anymore. Which I mean, that's a pretty lofty power,
Exactly.
you know, if you're, it's like superhero power, you know. And I said, well, I know this. And this is what I told him as best I can recall, you know, all those years ago, that what I learned at that camp was not about one religion being right and all the other religions being wrong. I learned that it's all about Jesus and having a relationship with him. And I want to just step back and make sure for myself that if the Mormon Church is true, I will go away from it and I'll come back to it.
It's going to sustain by itself. If it's true,
Yeah.
there's nothing can shake it.
Right, and I will leave. I will step away, asking God to guide me, because my model there was Joseph Smith himself, who at my same age, 14, according to my church, taught that he went out into a sacred grove
Yep.
in a grove area not far from his boyhood farm home, and he prayed, and God told him to join no church, and that all churches were corrupt and all professors were false. They taught the doctrines of men. Their hearts were far from me, but their lips, they speak of me with their lips, but their hearts are from me. So I knew that my faith taught me that all other kinds of Christian churches were wrong, false, unorthodox. And I knew that they claimed to be the only true church. So I said, if I step away and find out that the LDS Church is what it says, I will gladly come back. But if I step away and find out that it's not, and I explore these other faiths, then I'll maybe choose something differently.
Yeah.
And I will say only to make this point, that the second counselor in that bishop was very sincere, and he said, Greg, I believe that you are so sincere that I want to throw something out to you. I believe you will leave our church tonight. I don't think you're going to change your mind. But I prophesy, he used that word, I prophesy that in a span of 10 years, you will return to this church and you will know that it is the one true church upon the face of the earth. I say that in 10 years or less time. And part of the reason that you're leaving is that Heavenly Father is going to use your time away from the LDS Church, that when you come back, you will help us to reach you will help us to reach other people outside of the church with your knowledge of what it's like to live outside of the church.
Yeah.
And I just shrugged my shoulders and said, well, I don't know if that's going to be or not, but, interesting, So we wrapped up the meeting. I have a letter dated February 22nd, 1981 that says all of my connections to the LDS Church have been removed, that I am no longer a member. I don't have any priesthood anymore. It's all been taken from me. It's kind of an intimidating letter. I have that letter to this very day, of course. And interestingly enough, as years passed by, from 8th grade to 9th grade and 10th and 11th, and my mom and stepdad divorced, and my mom and I moved back to Southern California. Eventually, I'd find myself at a Christian high school in Southern California, off to a Christian college, and then to a Denver seminary. And so here I am back in Denver 10 years later. The year is now 1992. February of 1992. I had left the LDS Church in 82, right? Yeah, 82 is when 81, I'm sorry. So it was 91. 10 years later, I'm a student at Denver Seminary, February of 91, and I go to my old ward house in Littleton, Colorado. It was on Ridge Road. I know exactly where it's at. And I sat in a sacrament meeting. I didn't know if it was the sacrament meeting that I went to or not. I didn't know anybody. I didn't recognize anybody. They didn't recognize me. I didn't see a familiar face. But I sat through the service kind of symbolically to say my formal goodbye, because I said, now this man said that within 10 years I'll come back. And Lord, I've been to a Christian high school. I've been to a Christian college. I'm now in a seminary preparing to be a pastor in Utah. I know I'm not coming back. I do not believe the teachings that I was taught as a boy. about who Joseph Smith was, the Book of Mormon, and the different theology. I embrace biblical Christianity with a heart to share this with my LDS friends and do it in a loving and gracious way, but I'm not returning. And it was kind of my final farewell.
Your goodbye.
Just to be able to say I waited the 10 years and it's done. And so I came to Utah as a pastor in 1992.
So, I don't know. There might be people that doesn't have a background, or they don't know very much about the LDS Church and because for me there are questions that start popping right away. So, for example, there are two questions that came across this conversation. The first part, which is why is so important baptism for them, and second, why do you have to go and say, I want my name take or be removed from the, why those two? What will you say?
Well, it's very, very, very much built into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that it is an organization. So record keeping is extremely important. And it
For
goes,
them?
Yeah. It goes back to the origins of the LDS faith.
Okay.
The early LDS pioneers were record keepers. They recorded everything. They kept journals. They recorded the sermons that the prophets spoke. They took records and they carried them with them. So record keeping is kind of a big deal in the historical psyche of the LDS Church. So when you're baptized, it is not a generic thing. Many Christian churches would allow someone based upon a confession of faith, maybe a giving a short testimony or something of that kind. And then you're not joining that church because you're being baptized. You know that you're being baptized as an expression of your faith in Jesus Christ. You could walk away from that church 6 months later or move even to a new city, and you may or may not connect to a new church. We wouldn't, the traditional Christian church would not be concerned about that in the same way that the LDS Church would, because they want to keep a record of those that we have, those that we've baptized, those that have left, and those kind of things. Because theirs is more about membership. Baptism is not just giving an outward sign of your faith in Jesus that you're now going to follow him. That's very much the typical evangelical Christian type of baptism. It's a model of declaration. It's a declaration,
testimony. In action.
I'm a Christian and I'm following Jesus in this act of baptism, a baptism that, by the way, does not save you.
Exactly.
But in the LDS faith, not only is it required to become a legitimate member of the LDS Church, and i.e., if you're 27 years old and if you've gone to a Christian church for 10 years, when you join the LDS Church, you have to be rebaptized to be made a member of their church.
So if you go again back, you will have to get baptized.
Well, in my case too, because I renounced my previous baptism, I would have to be rebaptized.
Okay.
And it's interesting. The Catholic Church a few years ago had a kind of a study group that decided that if you're a Latter-day Saint and you convert to Catholicism, you have to be rebaptized. But if you're a Protestant and you convert to Catholicism, they will not require that you be rebaptized.
Wow,
because they believe that in the generic sense of the word, the Protestants, the Orthodox, and the Catholics are all
similar,
of the same kind of Christianity with different doctrines. But they say to those people who are part of different kinds of groups, like if you were a Muslim or if you were a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Latter-day Saint, they would say, you have to be rebaptized because you were not baptized in the Christian tradition. Now, vice versa, don't be offended, Latter-day Saint, because any Catholic, any Eastern Orthodox, any atheist, any, Jehovah's Witness, anything that comes into the Mormon faith has to be rebaptized so that they can be acknowledged as a true member and their records can be, added to and filled in. And so on the converse, when you leave, the idea of writing a letter or going to a bishop's court has been greatly modified. In the old days, like me going to my bishops and having that experience, well, I truly believe that there are so many people that are leaving the LDS Church now compared to 40, 30 years ago that it's faith challenging to these bishops and state counselors.
They need to keep up with information, especially with the internet.
Yeah, and if you're letting them testify to you about why they're leaving and tell you what the problems are, then some of these leaders can become kind of influenced by that. And the other thing is they can just be overwhelmed by the numbers of
Yeah.
people that are needing to leave. So today it's more typical to write a letter. To some degree, they will kind of slowly respond to it. If you're more persistent,
Okay.
you'll finally get a response. But I think they don't want you, they would rather have you as an inactive member that may come back someday later than to have you actually formally leave, because then they know that you've
Okay.
crossed the line and probably are never coming back.
Okay. So now, something that we need to let people know, because it could be said in a way like, well, Greg was never really very devoted LDS. And for what I heard, you were very much into the LDS church, their teachings. I mean, you were very devoted when you were a kid.
Yeah, my mom took us on in 1976, the bicentennial year of our country. We went on a trip back to Ohio, and while we were there, we went to Nauvoo, Illinois, where Joseph Smith basically was killed in the Carthage, Illinois area, and to the early temple. It wasn't rebuilt. I was so deeply taken by that experience to go to the place where Joseph Smith was killed in the Carthage jailhouse, to go to Nauvoo, to see the ruins of the temple, to see the city, and to hear the stories. I was, a devout kid. I know I wasn't a bishop or a missionary or anything like that, but in genuineness, I know for myself, and would be verified by any family member, that I was a serious-minded LDS youth.
Okay.
And then when I questioned it, I think it was because I had a sincere desire to know God and was willing to come back if it was true. But I truly believe that God led me into a deeply personal relationship with his son through Jesus Christ, and that it's no longer for me in any way, shape, or form about your church. It's about a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah. So I know time is money. So, but and we know today you are a pastor. You came to Utah, but there are so many things that I know you have experienced, and I want people to know about. So one of the thing is you mentioned here on Sunday that you used to be you work as a pastor in different churches here in the Valley, and at some point you decided to start this ministry called Standing Together. Can you tell me how that started happening? When do you start thinking about this idea?
It's interesting, and I know you had another question that you said over lunch that we were going to discuss.
Yeah, we will.
You haven't forgotten that one.
No, I haven't.
It was interesting because I came to Utah in 1992 after having served an internship in 1991 at Washington Heights, then Baptist Church. Now it's called Washington Heights Church up in South Ogden. I had such a wonderful relationship with the staff, the senior pastor, Les McGee, and Leon Shelton, the music pastor, and the various others, and had such a great experience that after serving there as a summer intern, after that I was called upon to become their outreach college pastor, outreach discipleship in college. And so I came in the summer, July 1st of 1992, to be a pastor, and I was there for 3 years and 2 months when I was invited by some members of my church who were starting a congregation up in Ogden Valley. It was kind of a new thing, and it was a very challenging decision for me because on the one hand, I was an associate pastor at I liken it into a great bonfire, a great fire, and people were laughing and enjoying life around the bonfire, and off in the great distance was a small little campfire, and I felt like I want to stay here where all the activity is and all the people are and the fun, and just it's so wonderful to be a part of Washington Heights Baptist Church. But I really felt the Lord began to kind of put my heart towards this valley and realized the fire up there is kind of small because there's not a whole lot of people involved in that church. It's a brand new church. They had never had a pastor. I'm not the church planter, but I was the founding pastor of the Ogden Valley Baptist Church, meaning that I was the first pastor they ever called. And for 2 years and 4 months, I was there before I stepped down. And it was a great experience, and we made a lot of progress. But I kind of felt in that time period, I was kind of discouraged about the limitation of being a small church in a rural valley community, that I was building relationships with LDS leaders. In fact, it was in after that experience, I was actually invited to join a church staff in 1998 down in Orem called Centerpoint Church. Now it used to be called EV Free Orem EV Free, and I was on staff there for just about 3 years, where these thoughts kept coming back that I've been a part of a Baptist church, an evangelical free church.
You were part of Centerpoint?
Yeah, I was on staff there with Scott McKinney. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So Washington Heights, very large church at the time that I was there, if not the largest evangelical church in the state of Utah. Then pastored pastored a small Baptist church up in the valley, and then EV Free, Centerpoint. So after almost 9 years, just shy of 9 years, we started standing together in March of 2001. Because I shared with Jill, and she knew my heart, that over the years I felt like one church, I don't care if you were a church of 50, 500, or 5,000, in a state of 3 million people, almost 3 million at the time, now over 3 million here in Utah. How could one church ever share the good news of a gospel centered in grace with LDS people when one of their number one question marks about us is that we are a divided Christianity? We are Baptist. We are Assemblies of God. We are EV Free. We are Lutherans. We are Presbyterians. We are Methodists. We are non-denominational. And I had known through my LDS youth that that was a great evidence piece that if these people were all Christians, they wouldn't be a part of different churches fighting each other. They'd be a part of one church. Just like ours. We have one church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that idea from Joseph Smith's first vision on has always been a stumbling block. And it's a stumbling block we created, not them. The onus is on us. We have divided ourselves. There was a great schism in 1054 when the Catholic Church broke with the Eastern Church. Yeah. And that's how you have Eastern Orthodoxy over in Constantinople and Alexandria, and how you have the Bishop of Rome starting the Western Church, and that's now become, the Pope. And they both claim that Peter was their guy, and they were, so the church divided into two after 1,000 years. That's not a big deal. They were divided across a great period of time. Well, 500 years later, nearly 500, in 1517, Martin Luther says to the Catholic Church, there's corruption in the vineyard, and we got to clean house. And the Pope didn't take kindly to that, so that led to the Protestant Reformation. And so since 1517, Protestants have been dividing like rabbits ever since, or multiplying like rabbits ever since. So how many churches do you think there are, Marco, in America that are registered with the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service? When a church organizes, it has to put its, papers into the IRS, right? Over 32,000 different denominations, not church.
Denomination only.
Denominations. Some of the denominations are so tiny, that you wouldn't even know that they exist. But 32, and many of them, let's be honest, many of them we would not consider
a denomination.
Christian denominations. They're just aberrant groups. But there are 32,000 churches, Christian churches, that say that they exist in the United States of America now. If I'm not mistaken, and I'm happy to be corrected if somebody can figure that out differently. But that's what I knew when we started standing together. That's the division. And so the LDS Church looks at us and say, "Thank you, but no thank you." We have one true church. We have a prophet. We have a first and counselor and a second counselor. We have 12 apostles and we have 70s. And we have the organization and the authority. It's beautiful to us. And we don't want what you got, And it's weird. I've heard Latter-day Saint general authorities actually make this comment. Greg, to some degree, we're more like the Catholics because we have a prophet like they have a pope. Yeah. But we're more like evangelicals in the sense that we're more Protestant in our culture. The LDS church service doesn't look like a Catholic mass. Okay. It feels more like an 1800s Methodist Baptist kind of service.
Never been in a service.
Yeah, you haven't. Well, it's very structured. It's the same service they had in 1950 and the same service they had in 1900, and it's a very basic service: opening prayer, song, word business, sermon 1, sermon 2. So it's very standardized. And I think for that reason, I was talking to an LDS person just Tuesday, and here it is Thursday. And this guy asked the question of me and a friend of mine, another pastor in this valley, and he said, hey, is it strange that I, as a Latter-day Saint who loves my faith, who goes to my church regularly, I kind of like going to evangelical churches because I like to listen to you guys as you sing praise songs to God. And I love how you talk about grace. Now, I love grace, and I think you guys do grace better than us. And I love the worship. I think you guys sing praises to God much more powerfully than our music program. But I like our Book of Mormon. I'm not giving up on the Book of Mormon. And I like our authority structure with a prophet and apostles and things like that. And he said, is it wrong for me to attend both churches? And I obviously I answered him that question. But the point is that I think there are things that are intriguing to our Latter-day Saint friends today.
Here, the church,
churches right here in Utah, because they're starting to look beyond the division of the churches, i.e. the different kinds of churches, and realizing that for some reason we Protestants, we evangelical Protestants, don't seem to have a problem calling our Lutheran friend a fellow Christian, or our Baptist friend a fellow Christian. And so they're kind of intrigued by that, but they love the expressive worship, and they're listening to K-Love, they're listening to Air One.
I know, I heard that.
You know, they're watching The Chosen. We have like new common ground. My wife's involved in a Bible study program called Multiply Goodness, and she's one of the writers. And they're bringing LDS women and evangelical women into studying the Bible, just the Bible. And it was started by an LDS an LDS leader who was and is very prominent in the LDS faith.
Yeah, it is.
And she is a person that has a lot of influence. So I would say that that what's happening today is very interesting, that more and more evangelicals and Latter-day Saints are enabling themselves to have conversations and building bridges of friendship and acknowledging there's some very fundamental differences in our theology, but not arguing about them to offend, but talking them through to say, hey, these are honest differences. What do you say about this? And these conversations are very compelling to me. I think God is stirring something up. And you might say, like, the natural inclination is, well, who do you think's winning? Are you winning or are they winning? It's not about winning or losing. It's about letting the Holy Spirit and the Word of God kind of teach us, and we go in all of these dialogues that I work with leaders of the LDS Church and leaders of the evangelical church, with scholars talking with other scholars, with university students talking with other university students. All of these examples are all about cultivating friendships, respectful dialogue. We believe in dialogue, not debate. We believe in conversation, not contentions. We believe that we can honestly talk about our differences and attempt to persuade one another through the principle of convicted civility that says, hey, I am convicted that I'm right and that you're wrong, and vice versa. You think you're right and I'm wrong. But we can be gracious to one another. We can
have a nice conversation.
And have a nice, civil conversation.
Yeah. So now, how many years standing together? Was born in?
22, 23 next year.
So that, oh wow. So in 1997?
2001.
Okay, 2001.
And that, I think your last question, just to summarize, that's what compelled Jill and I, my wife, to say, let's start a ministry to
create
help
this unity
together so that we can have a better conversation with our LDS
present
friends.
Ourselves as not just here is Somos Vida, or I don't know, the well. Is like, how can we present to this community as one church united?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Our focus is on biblical unity and oneness.
Now, here's the part that I love to hear, and I always get fascinated with all the stories because I think you're crazy, or you're very brave, and I think you're brave of all those two, because you are the kind of person who search for opportunities, and when you just come with an idea, it's like today we were having a meeting and you throw an idea and it's like boom, the bomb explode. And I think God used that kind of thing with you, but you start creating these connections with LDS scholars, leaders. So how is your first and how when did you start thinking like, okay, I'm gonna write, I'm gonna call? How was it like?
Well, you know the story, I think, and I'll just remind you of it, and for anybody that might be listening in on our conversation. So I was minding my own business as a young pastor in Utah, and I had introduced two people to each other. Dr. Craig Blomberg of Denver Seminary. He was a New Testament
Oh, I remember.
professor.
Yeah.
And then a BYU professor that was very prominent. His name was Dr. Stephen Robinson. Every Latter-day Saint will know that name because he wrote the book Believing in Christ, and then he followed it up with Following Christ, and they were huge bestsellers. Believing Christ is still in every LDS Deseret bookstore and are still bought regularly. It was a very influential book, and it was so coming out, I believe, in 1991. It was so because Stephen Robinson talked about grace as a Latter-day Saint scholar
For the first time?
in a way that not many had ever discussed grace.
Okay.
And it was provocative, and the fact that so many people bought it.
So, but let's clarify something because it's important to clarify the concepts here. Because LDS look the word grace different than as we see it.
Yeah, in fact, in a LDS King James Bible, you know, they have a study Bible or a glossary of terms. In their concept, grace is an enabling power that God gives you to live a Christian life. So it's power to be able to obey Heavenly Father.
Okay.
Now, that concept of enabling power is not totally foreign to in evangelicals because we do speak about God's grace to give us the ability to endure and be faithful and serve Him and you know, live out our Christian life. But for us, fundamentally, grace is about an unearned, unmerited gift from God.
Yeah.
Unearned, I didn't earn it. Unmerited, I don't deserve it. Those what those two words mean. Unearned, I didn't earn it. And unmerited, I don't deserve it.
Yeah.
And the gift that He gives us is eternal life in His Son, Jesus
And
Christ.
it's yeah.
Forgiveness of our sins and eternal life in heaven. And nothing more. You don't have to put in money in the plate. You don't have to go on a mission. You don't have
Wear
to go to
some
the temple.
special clothes.
You don't have to wear special clothes. You're saved by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. That's the great cardinal doctrine of traditional evangelical Bible believing Christians. Grace alone salvation. That is a hallmark distinctive doctrine. Now our LDS friends are talking much more about grace today, and there are certain leaders and speakers that I think are really getting
really into
some great
grace.
messages about grace.
No, but we have
But traditionally not so.
we have this guy, this LDS scholar that is
Stephen
writing and talking about grace as ever before.
Right. And in 1992, I invited him to Denver Seminary to speak on our campus. I was the student body president. Now, that was pretty gutsy in and of itself. To bring a real-life Latter-day Saint Mormon scholar to Denver Seminary, I mean, I was breaking a few rules and not telling people what I was doing.
Rules with who? With LDS
No,
here?
with the administration.
Oh, wow.
With the president and the president's office and the student council office. I mean, doing that by itself was like, did you get permission to invite a Mormon to our, to our campus? But he declined because what I wanted to have happen was I wanted some of our faculty to respond to a book he had written in 1989 called, are you ready? Are Mormons Christians by Stephen Robinson. And he makes a case in this book in 1989 that yes, Mormons are Christians, and you Christians can't tell us that we're not. And he uses 4 basic arguments that he feels traditional Christians use to exclude Mormonism from being a Christian religion. And he takes on those doctrines. One is the historical exclusion. One is the theological exclusion. One is the textual exclusion using biblical text. And these 4 major arguments that he raises. I said, I want to have a faculty member respond to each one of your major
Arguments,
segments, and you then respond to them. And he literally said to me, do you think I would be caught dead on the campus of a Baptist seminary with 4 against 1 and an audience full of evangelicals? And I said, yeah, why? And he said, no, I won't make it out alive. And this was 1992. And I had to feel for him. I said, I hate to say this. I think I understand how you feel. You don't feel you'll be treated nice. You won't be protected. But I want to assure you, if anybody says an unkind word to you or a harsh word to you or any faculty mocks you or challenges you unfairly, I will correct them. I will stand up for you. I will be the MC of the event, and I will stop them. And he said, well, I'll think about it. And then later he told me, this is a true story. He was speaking at a Know Your Religion seminar up in Sacramento, California. And I think I know who the guy was. But somebody came up to him and tried to have a conversation with him who was an evangelical and kind of witness to him or challenge him, right?
Yeah.
And Stephen Robinson got frustrated with him and said, okay, we've done enough of this. I'm going to leave now. And the guy knew about our plans to have this Are Mormons Christian seminar at Denver Seminary. And the guy yelled out, well, they're gonna eat you alive at Denver Seminary. And so he came back with that story, and he told me, Greg, I don't know how a guy in Sacramento would even know that I might be considering this invitation. So you must have told somebody, and you told people something that you're not telling me, that they think I'm going to get eaten alive. So thank you, but no thank you. And I felt very discouraged. I felt very angry that whoever said this, I didn't know who it was. And I felt very disappointed with myself that I had let the word get out.
Yeah.
And somehow it was taken that direction. So I went ahead with the presentation. Our Mormons Christians, 4 faculty members responded to his book. We taped it on a cassette back in those days. And I sent it to him as a gift. And I said, I know you weren't able to come, but I wanted you to hear how your book was treated. And if you have the time, it would mean so much to me to hear from you as to what you thought, because I think we did a good job. So I sent it to him at his BYU office. Every month I would make a phone call, leave a message on his voicemail. Hi, Dr. Robinson. This is Pastor Greg. I was just wondering if you listened to that tape yet. Did you have any feelings about it? I bugged him. I actually have the letter, the 7-page, single-space typed letter that he sent back to me evaluating all aspects of that multi-hour presentation about Tim Weber, Craig Blomberg, Vernon Grounds, Gordon Lewis, and some not so kind words for me too. He said, you think you're a good representative of the LDS Church because you was raised in the LDS faith. You were a terrible representative. He was pretty blunt, but he said very nice things about Dr. Craig Blomberg. He was decent. He was fine. He was respectable. So I did what I thought I had the right to do. I sent that letter to all 4 of the panelists to say, this is what Dr. Robinson thought about your presentation. Nobody responds to it except one person, my hero in the story, Dr. Craig Blomberg. He responds in a written letter to Stephen Robinson. Greg passed along your letter to me. I thank you for your kind words. Let's start a friendship. This is in 1992 and following, probably like it's 1993 by now. I get a phone call from Stephen Robinson. He's furious with me. How dare you pass along
Why
my letter?
did you share the letter?
My letter was full of criticisms. I was rather blunt. I wasn't very nice. And you sent it off to these guys without my permission. And I apologized once again profusely. And I said, Dr. Robinson, I don't mean to keep offending you and angering you. I just am trying to keep this conversation going. And I'm so sorry. And thank you for your letter. And I thought I'd never hear from him again. I consequently would, because now 1993, 1994, 1995, one of the things that they did, which was so cool, they decided, apart from me, to do something as a gesture of goodwill. They decided we should get to know each other better. So Stephen Robinson invited Craig Blomberg to Utah. He slept in his house, in his guest room. He went to an LDS ward that he attended.
Wow.
Ate at his dinner table, and just spent a full day and a half over in Steve Robinson's house. Vice versa, Steve Robinson flew to Denver, slept in Craig Blomberg's house, ate at his table, went to his evangelical church, and they had lots of conversation.
Wow.
And they decided to write a book together. They thought this will be incredible.
Let me see if I remember the name.
It's kind.
How great the divide?
How wide the
How
divide.
wide?
And InterVarsity Press published this epic landmark book, it was called at the time, How Wide the Divide, A Mormon and an Evangelical in Conversation. And they tackle 4 primary doctrines. Who is God?
Yeah.
Who is Jesus? What is Scripture or authority? And how is a person saved? Saved from their sin. And they wrestled with all those 4 principal doctrines. Steve would give his perspective. Craig would give his perspective. Steve would critique Craig. Craig would critique Steve. And then they wrote a joint summary page and moved on. That book, they were so kind, they dedicated it to me.
Oh, wow.
To Pastor Greg Bettel Johnson, whose initial interest led to the writing of this book. And when they did that, I got immediately attached to the book here in Utah as a pastor in 1997. So Stephen Robinson, feeling really good about this book and this project, says, Craig, come over and talk about this story from your perspective to the Friday Religion Faculty Forum at BYU for all the religion faculty. So Craig is an invited evangelical scholar into the halls of the Joseph Smith Memorial Building at BYU, Joseph Smith Building, and he gives this little hour-long lecture, Vice versa, Craig says, well, then I'm going to invite you to Denver Seminary. And so Denver Seminary is going to have him come.
So we can say that everything that you were planning in some point in the beginning, starting this dialogue, start happening.
It starts happening. It started very serendipitous. I mean, the night we had that presentation in May of 1992, I didn't know it was going to lead to a friendship between Craig and Stephen. I didn't know it was going to lead to a book, and I didn't know it was going to lead to so much from there. Because after Stephen Robinson went to Denver Seminary, which was so provocative and so scary for people, that I thought as an alum who was very involved in this relationship, that I could come and hear Steve speak to the faculty at Denver Seminary. And the president himself told Craig Blomberg, Greg Johnson cannot come. We don't want any outsiders. We don't want this getting out. We don't want anybody to know that we're doing this. They were so afraid of what the flashback would be, or the slashback or whatever. So he came and at that time, he met Dr. Bruce Demarest. And Bruce Demarest, off the top of his just off the cuff said, as an evangelical, I find it quite interesting that I have something in common with you. And he said, what's that? He said, well, when I was doing my PhD work with Dr. F.F. Bruce, and everybody knows that name if you're in the New Testament scholarship, Dr. F.F. Bruce from Manchester, England was the quintessential New Testament scholar. He said, when I was studying with F.F. Bruce, I decided to do a study of the Melchizedek priesthood in the book of Hebrews. And Stephen Robinson said, wait a minute. I thought we, the Latter-day Saints, were the only people that had any interest in the Melchizedek priesthood. We didn't think you guys even cared about the Melchizedek priesthood. He said, well, we do, but we don't see it like you see it. He said, well, then you have to come over to BYU and you have to give a lecture just like Craig did. And so that was on April 11th, 1997, April 11th. I go down there with Bruce Demarest, because finally I couldn't go to the first presentation. I couldn't go to the second presentation. But finally, with the third presentation, I'm his host. I go down there. He gives a lecture that is very, very much not in agreement with the LDS view of Melchizedek priesthood. He gives a very traditional biblical point of view and challenges the LDS point of view on Melchizedek priesthood quite a bit. But he's very kind and very gracious. And Stephen Robinson thanks him for the talk. My newfound friend from that day, I'll be having lunch with him tomorrow, Dr. Robert Millett, is then the dean of the religion faculty, and he has a question for Dr. Demarest that really intrigued me. So I went back to his seat, talked with him a little bit. He invited me into his office. I saw all these evangelical books, and I said, why are you so interested in evangelical writers? He said, well, I just love how you treat the Bible, and I'm very interested. And the next thing I knew, he was coming to visit me in Ogden Valley as a pastor, and then I was going to come back and visit him at his office. And this starts this friendship that has never died down with one of the preeminent scholars and thinkers inside the LDS faith, long retired. But on that same day, after I left Robert Millett's office and Bruce and I drove back to Salt Lake City, we stopped in downtown Salt Lake City. Had never walked around Temple Square or any of the areas there. And I said, let's have a little walk around. I'll show you around.
This is my favorite story, by the way. I know where you're going here.
And we're walking around, and lo and behold, we're on the corner of South Temple And Main Street, there was a Main Street there between the Joseph Smith Memorial Building and the Temple Square because we used to have a street there. And we're standing there at the corner of that street, and I said, Dr. Demarest. He said, yes. I said, would you like to meet a Mormon apostle today? And he says, rather, flippantly, yeah, sure. How do we do that? And I said, well, typically that would not be possible. But one of them is standing right in front of us. So let's say hello. And he goes, okay. And I said, excuse me, Elder Holland, Elder Jeffrey R. Holland, who was then a young apostle in 1997. I said, my name is Pastor Greg Johnson. This is Dr. Bruce Demarest of the Denver Theological Seminary. Just this morning, he gave a lecture at the BYU Faculty Friday Forum on the Melchizedek priesthood. And we noticed as we were walking around Temple Square that you were standing in front of us, and we just wanted to say hello. And I remember his words. I've joked with him for years. We've known each other for all these years. He's very ill right now. He's dealing with some serious kidney problems, and he's not well, but he's stabilized a little bit. Anyways, we became friends that day and have been friends ever since. His comment to me was, young man, that was a mouthful. Can you repeat yourself and go a little slower? And I said, I'm Pastor Greg Johnson. This is Dr. Bruce Demarest from Denver Seminary. He was lecturing at the BYU Faculty Forum just this morning on the doctrine of the Melchizedek priesthood, and we just wanted to say hello. We didn't stop talking for about 15 minutes.
Wow.
Now, if you've ever been downtown, you know that the signal that the light has changed and you can walk is the bird chirping, the chirping bird sound.
Yeah.
And so that bird chirped 3 or 4
Quite a
different
time.
times while we were just chatting. He was with another man. You don't regularly see LDS apostles out.
And by the way, this is not a normal thing that an apostle might do. Am I correct?
No, I mean, I think he was very intrigued that I was a Baptist minister, that I knew him by face and recognized him. He was probably intrigued. Dr. Bruce Demarest, a scholar from Denver Seminary. So it was intriguing to him. And we chit-chat, and he looks down at his watch. We've been talking maybe close to 15 minutes. And this other guy was totally quiet. He said, young man, you have done something. I said, what's that? He goes, you have made me late for my meeting. And he reaches into his jacket, he pulls out his card, and he says, here's my card. I want you to call my secretary, Renee, and I want you to set up an appointment for us to have lunch together.
Oh, wow.
And I did, and we set that up a month later in May. I didn't have a cell phone back then. And, my memories, my mind is.
We're getting old. It's fine. You can say it.
His secretary is not Renee, but I know her. I know his secretary. It's a new secretary now, Lisa, but it wasn't Renee. Oh my goodness! It'll come to me in a second. The then secretary of Elder Holland. I called her. She invited me in, and I came to meet with Elder Holland on that.
Just you?
Yeah, just came to meet him for lunch that next month. He was called by the First Presidency and asked to make himself available to the Russian consulate that was visiting Salt Lake City that day. So he had to cancel our meeting. But I didn't have a cell phone, thank goodness, so I could never be contacted because I wasn't at my office and I wasn't at my house, the only phone numbers they had. So I drive all the way down to Salt Lake from Ogden, and I come in through the security and go up to his office, and I almost had her name just there. It'll come to me. So sorry, I forgot that name. It's coming. It is coming. So she says, oh, Pastor Johnson, I'm so sorry. I did everything I could to reach you. Elder Holland will not be able to meet with you today. Something came up, the Russian consulate, whatever. And I said, okay, that's no bet. I'll just try to reschedule, and that'd be fine. And Elder Holland heard me in the foyer, in the outer office, and he pokes his head out of the door and he says, Greg, is that you? And I said, yeah. And he says, come in here real quick. And it was so like we were long lost buddies, and I come into his room and he says, I've got like 10 minutes before I got to be out of here. And we're so sorry that you drove all this way and it's not going to work out. But hey, let's at least have a quick word. And I appreciate you coming down. And we'll schedule another lunch for next month. So we were going to have another lunch. And subsequently, now I had not just one meeting, but 2 meetings with Elder Holland.
Wow.
And like I said, it opened up the door for friendship that has carried on to this present day.
I know.
I would say that there's a genuine, he's a much older man than me. His dear wife, who I knew, passed away this summer, very tragically, very sad. My heart goes out to him. I really love him as a deep and sincere friendship.
Yeah.
And he often affirms his love for me as a friend as well. So I think that that's a very genuine relationship. And I've known him now for over 27 years, from 97 till now.
By the way, we have but you have an interview with him in your YouTube channel, Standing Together, with former
prominent AG leader,
Yeah.
Dr. George Wood.
So, and I can testify of that relationship for what I saw that day because I was there recording.
Yeah. It's a cherished thing. Not a lot of people, several thousand have viewed it, but it's the kind of thing that if we could promote it a little bit better, I don't know, I think many people would be intrigued to see where some of the places our friendship took us.
So many things, yeah. So on Sunday, you share with us kind of like the cherry.
Sunday, I'm just going to say, for the sake of myself, we're going to take a break right there on Sunday because I've got to go to the bathroom.
Oh, yeah. Okay, you can take a bathroom break on Sunday. Hey, if you are watching, hopefully we are live. We are live. No, not joke, Greg. We are live, but this is a podcast where we are talking a little bit about Greg Johnson. He's a former LDS. He is the leader of a ministry here in Salt Lake City called Standing Together. 23 years of ministry, leading and working with churches here in Salt Lake, uniting the churches in a way to bring them together on how we can relate and do things for this state. I think is very unique today. And in fact, some of those pastors got together. We had a meeting here actually, so it was very interesting. And for those who are watching live, I would like to see if you have any questions on Facebook, on YouTube. Please let us know. We would love to. I'm going to have open here Facebook too, just in case. But we would love to. We would love to know your thoughts about what's going on.
Is that live? That was live?
It is live.
Oh, I thought we were going to edit it.
No. Look, people is reacting here. True. He went to the bathroom. Just kidding. So.
And her name was Randy, not Renee.
Randy, you're in the way to the bathroom. That was the. So you on Sunday you put the cherry on top of the cake, telling the story about Ravi Zachariah coming twice to the tabernacle. Okay. 100 years before, it was another prominent pastor that shared. Those have been the only unique, plus obviously Nick Vujicic. But I love the story of how you get that. I think that is one of my favorite, and I wanted it for you to share that story.
Of what story?
Because you are, for the people that is watching, Greg is this kind of person that is very crazy. So how did it come, this idea of saying, okay, I'm going to ask for this place to host this guy here? And tell me a little bit about that.
It is another great God story. It really is. And I think looking back, both my LDS friends and myself think the same way. I had initiated the beginning of Standing Together, and because I knew Ravi Zacharias prior to this, in fact, as a young pastor at Washington Heights, I had gotten 22 churches together to invite him to Utah in 1994, 10 years earlier. And I'd gotten to know his wife, Margie, and Margie kind of kept his calendar. That was kind of she was the person who decided yes or no on speaking invitations. And I presented to her in 2001, is there any chance that we could ever have Ravi back to Utah and do a big outreach where he shared and did that? And she put us on the calendar for November of 2004. November of 2004. Now it's 2001. It seems like 2004 is like years
Forever.
from now, and yet we needed all that time. And so I started to work with different campus ministries. Let's have Ravi speak at the University of Utah, and he did. We had the first night was at the University of Utah in the main auditorium there that's very famous, and they have a lot of plays there. The second night we were going to go to like BYU and have a lecture at Brigham Young University, and the third night
Did you have the chance to go there too?
No, I'll come back to that. In 1994, when Ravi came, we did secure 2 speaking engagements for him, one in the morning and one in the afternoon at BYU under the Richard L. Evans chair and Dr. David Paulson. So Ravi had spoken down there, and we thought, okay, we'll do 3 universities, because Ravi spoke at a lot of universities, the University of Utah, BYU, and then we go up to Weber State and Ogden. And so I was able to secure the venues for the University of Utah and the Weber State very easily, and it worked out well because we had plenty of time. And I worked with campus ministries that had access to those facilities. And then I'm working with my friend Bob Millett, and I'm trying to work with this and that, and I can't get any confirmation that we can have an event at BYU. So in that time period, something else was going on, and it was really revolving around initially the Winter Olympics of 2002. But in 2002, we had a press conference, and a number of Christian leaders and the Salt Lake Seminary called the press conference together, President Ken Mulholland, and I joined that press conference as a young ministry leader. And we were basically saying that, it was in advance of the 2002 Winter Olympics, so it would have been in late 2001. Okay. And we said, when the Olympics come, we shouldn't have all these anti-Mormons show up yelling, screaming, telling the Mormon people they're wrong. This is terrible. We shouldn't do this. So we had a press conference, and it came and went with not much reaction. Well, in 2003, after the Olympics came and went, and after another general conference session, it was the fall of 2003, an altercation took place between one of the counter-cult Mormons and a Polynesian Latter-day Saint. And this guy was a big fella, and he was so frustrated that one of the counter-cult anti-Mormon people, as they are sometimes referred to, was waving this flag of an LDS garment, the LDS wear a garment.
No.
And they're waving the flag, waving it on a pole, and then they also have the green apron that is used in the LDS temple services, and they're stomping on it, and they're wiping their rear end fictitiously, and it was so offensive and so egregious.
These are Christian, by the way.
They're professing Christian, to denounce, to defame, to insult the LDS people. And this Polynesian guy said, enough is enough. He grabbed the man's pole, took the garment off of it, took up the garments. He just didn't want him to desecrate something he held sacred. And mind you, to my evangelical friends, nobody should tolerate that.
No.
I mean, if you're a Jewish kid, you shouldn't have your yarmulke ripped off your head and stepped on. If you're a Muslim and you have a prayer shawl, you should not have that prayer shawl ripped off your body and stepped on. That is egregious. It would be considered a hate crime today. And yet that's what those people were doing. So the police were called, they were brought in, and consequently the Polynesian man was taken to jail. He had to pay a fine or something because it was he was violating the free speech rights of this counter-cult person. So in that day, we felt the understandable person got fined and the other person didn't. I then went to the pastors that I was already in network with, and I said to them in a very, very important meeting, I said, at some point, if we say nothing, we become complicit with those who speak loudest. We say that we're Christians.
Yeah.
They say that they are Christians. So when they go down to Temple Square and behave like this, the Latter-day Saints have nothing other to do than to assume everybody who calls himself a Christian, like us, like an evangelical Christian, is with them.
Yep.
And I'm tired of it, and I know that we can't do this anymore. And we've got to make a presence known. So everybody, almost like that meeting today, started to say, you're right. Okay, what can we do? And we said, we're going to call another press conference on the corner of the conference center on Main Street and North Temple. And we did. And the media was there. All the news media, the newspapers, the TVs, they were there. And we read a statement, and several pastors I asked to speak for. There was, if I recall, there were 34 semicircle of pastors, right, with on the back, the conference center being at our back. And we denounced these activities and said they must cease because the LDS Church didn't deserve to be ridiculed and mocked as they went to their meetings.
Let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Is this the time when the church in front of Life Church went to protest and Pastor Jim had to have security or something like that?
Do you remember that?
No, because he always told me that story, and I was like,
yes.
But this is the kind of like
when he read the statement, they zeroed in on him and thought he was the guy that did this. I happened to have a case of laryngitis that day, which he jokes with
and
me.
he read it.
And he read the statement. I would have read it had I had not a bad voice that day. And he says, I'll still never forgive you for that. So we read the statement. It was all covered in the media, and immediately the media began to get comments from the people. And at the time, there was a guy that was kind of known as their ringleader, and he denounced me and media. He said, and this was one of the big quotes, if they didn't